take it all away.
Now our next speaker is an amazing speaker too. He's an internationally renowned best-selling author. He was listed as one of the top 100 most influential Floridians in 2015. He's been a CEO of a variety of organizations, including the #1 consumer product of 2015. Who knows what that is? The hoverboard. He was the CEO over the hoverboard company. And I don't know if you'll get a chance to talk about that, about the successes, and then when you're doing that and suddenly you wake up one day and you find out your product can't be taken on airplanes anymore. It makes, we talk about the business battleground. He's been through the business battleground. In addition, he's a private pilot, loves horses, and was a candidate for the state senate in 2012. So would you please welcome the man who's an international doctorate in business and entrepreneurship, Dr. Rollan Roberts.
And now that I know this love, I can throw my
hands up, worries down. That's great. How many of you want God's divine favor and power in your business? Say yes, or raise your hand. Say yes. Yeah, I'm telling you. Then here's the question. How many of you have at least $1 in your bank account? Raise your hand. You have at least $1. Good. Here's the question then. Whose dollar is it? Whose dollar is it? Now I want you to think before you answer, because the challenge is your answer comes with responsibility. If it's actually his, then he controls, and you have a set of principles that dictates how you spend that dollar. It determines your sales methodology. It should determine your operational procedures. It determines how you make buying decisions, which screen to buy, what projectors to buy, what laptops to buy, what trips to go on, how to invest, what your marketing strategies are. Do we do this one? Do we do that? Do we do partners or distributors or social media? Inbound, outbound, B2B, B2C, all the different things. It's all about who owns that dollar. Whose money is it? Because that determines all of your decisions. It determines where you live. It determines what you drive. It dictates so many different things at every point in your life. Whose money is it? The reason I ask that question is because obviously that's the only way to know that you've conquered greed is by how much you give. Right? It's not about how much it's about how much you give, not how much you keep. So the question that I have are a few thoughts for you of some entrepreneurs and business owners who really were generous in their business. God truly did own their business. There's a book called God Owns My Business by Stanley Tam. Has anybody ever read that? It's an old book, but it's a good one. He was the founder and CEO of the largest plastics manufacturer in the United States, up in Ohio. And he literally got to the point to where 90% of all of the profit of the company was given away. And he really wanted to get that to 97, 98, 99%. That's where he wanted to be. So one of the things that, in another business, we obviously know about Truett Cathy and Chick-fil-A. We know about, there's a friend of mine who owns a construction company in Orlando. They do a little over $500 million a year in revenue. They do all of the construction on I-4. So if you ever go through Orlando and you're in traffic for a couple hours, there is something to be thankful for, because part of those proceeds are being given to kingdom building activities. But this is a man who has a chaplain on his staff. They have for the families and for the employees and for the staff to be able to pray with them when they're going through different challenges or issues or just struggling. This is someone who they have literally worship services once or twice a year. Their company parties don't look like maybe some of the company parties that you have or that you go to. I'm telling you, when God owns your business, when you have a God business, a lot of things look different. And so a lot of the things that we hear are, well, what does that mean? What is a God business? What is it? How do I know if I have a God business? I mean, I live my faith through my business, but you know what I find is so true with most executives? Their personal faith is publicly irrelevant. And what we want to do with the Business Battleground is help your personal faith be publicly relevant. So I'm going to share with you a few different ways, 3 different ways to actually do it. A couple other examples. A friend of mine owns a coal mine up in West Virginia, $600 million coal mine that they're just launching, opening this year, creating hundreds and hundreds of jobs. And you know what he told me? He had my bride and I over to his house, and we were at their second home in Disney Oaks there on Disney property. And he said, for the first time in my career, I want to do it right. This is going to be one business that it's going to be a God business from the beginning. And so he literally asked us to architect what that looks like for a coal mine. It does not matter where you are and what you do. You can bring God and the divine power and supernatural favor of God on your life and your business. There was a company we were looking at acquiring and in talks with up in the Panhandle. And whenever I was doing some due diligence on that company, the first thing that struck me was a verse that he had in the upper right-hand corner of his website. There was no other reference to anything. There was no talk about God or faith or anything else. But I immediately knew that this is someone who, with whatever scope of knowledge he had a desire to put Christ in his business. And that was the biggest challenge that I faced, because the problem was not that I intentionally rebelled. The problem is I did not have leadership or mentorship or somebody speaking into my life saying, hey, here's how you can live your faith in business. Here's how you, as whatever the role was, here's how you can bring God into your work and into the marketplace. And so I'm going to be giving you a few different ways that you can do that tonight. But what I can tell you is that the God business, first and foremost, is a generous business. It starts with a spirit of generosity. If he does not own your money, then everything else that I say tonight really isn't going to make sense, and it'll never be fully executed. And if any of you have ever hired a consultant ever, you know that it's not in the idea, it's always in the execution. In fact, we could take everybody in this room, give people the same 10 phone numbers to call, and we'd all have vastly different results if we were using the same script, because of our spirit, because of our attitude, because of our energy, because of the confidence, or just if our spirit bears witness with a unique individual, because of what Charles was sharing with how we communicate with people. But the God business is focused on kingdom building activities. One of the lessons that I didn't understand for years was the difference between kingdom investing and philanthropy. Now, I sit on the board of a great philanthropic organization that helps a number of charities, whether it's homeless or veterans or just a host, Down Syndrome Association coming up, and girls that they rescue, a number of different charities that they support. So that's great work, but I cannot confuse my contribution with kingdom building activities. 90% of 501c3s up until about the year 2000 were churches, places of worship and faith. And since then, only 10% were all of the other community type organizations. Today, that number is literally just about reversed. And of course, the giving flows that direction. So when you look at actual kingdom building activity and what kind of investment are you making in eternal things, you know, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also, which that's always interesting, because you don't make the decision with your heart. You put your money in first, and trust me, your heart will follow. All of a sudden, you know, if when Charles had a hedge fund or whatever else, he didn't follow companies that you don't invest in. You don't have the bandwidth, you don't care. But all of a sudden, you put a few bucks into a company, you better know we're going to be watching that company. We're going to be watching the metrics and the financials. And that's exactly this difference when you have a kingdom business and when you are investing in the kingdom. If, and of course, you know the parable. If you have $1,200 in your bank account and you have $1 million in your bank account and you both write a check to the Business Battleground for $1,000 tonight, well, guess what? Who's more generous? The person with $1,200, the person with $1 million? Obviously, the person with $1,200, because it's not about what they gave, right? It was what they kept. So that's how you know if you're being generous or not. And the spirit, it goes way beyond money. A spirit of generosity really is about looking for ways to bless other people, and you're always, it's an attitude, it is a spirit of looking for ways to bless people. One of the things that I find very interesting is that giving is not a one-time experience. It's not a capital campaign. It's who you are. You're constantly looking for ways to invest in other people and in eternal things. And of course, one of the hardest lessons I ever learned was that God will give through you what he never would give to you. I used to think, if I have $1 million, then I can do this, this, and this, and this. Oh, and I'll give, 100,000 or 10% or whatever. And I thought that's what I was kind of raised and taught, and thought I was doing right by doing that. And in actuality, that's not a spirit of generosity at all. And then I realized that my spirit may be the very thing keeping me from getting $1 million, because God could give me $1 million tomorrow if I was doing His will through it, and if I was supposed to just be a conduit so it kind of flows through me for His purposes. So as you focus on becoming a God business and bringing more of the divine power and the supernatural favor into your life and business, realize that it starts with having a spirit of generosity, and putting God back in business starts with you as the CEO, the entrepreneur, and the leader. There are several different seasons that your business will go through. And obviously people have a lot of different talks on the weather seasons, but I want to give you 3 distinct principles tonight that as a God business and as a God business CEO, how you can respond to those times. Because you already know the ebbs and flows and ups and downs of business. What you might not have heard before is how a God CEO can respond in those crises. The very first one is the wilderness. The wilderness. And I don't know how many of you maybe you or your business are in the wilderness tonight. But look, we all go through times where we feel irrelevant, or we feel like our talents are not being used to their full ability, or we're downtrodden, we're defeated, we're lonely, we're discouraged. Things aren't going the way that we want them to go. And maybe we've lost some influence, or we're just searching for guidance. And that's the time of the wilderness where you're lost. And it's like, where do I go from here? Well, let me tell you, the best example I can think of is Moses. I mean, this guy was the highest trained executive, if you will, next in line for the throne of one of the major world empires that our human history has ever known, the Egyptian Empire. And he was a qualified, trained warrior. He was a man's man. He was the most well-educated in all of Egypt. So he's brilliant. He can fight. He understands strategy. And then what does God do with all of that talent? He ends up on the backside of a desert in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, I've been in the wilderness. I have been in the wilderness. Okay, and let me tell you, and some of you can relate, when you're in the wilderness, I'm telling you, how much hopelessness that I experienced and that I felt, it's unbelievable. It's an overwhelming feeling. And I remember thinking about Moses when I was in my wilderness, and I thought, here's a man who had a whole lot more degrees, a whole lot more qualified, had skills that I could never dream of, and he's in the wilderness. So he had to feel 10 times what I was feeling. But you start to wonder, God, I just want to be used of you. I just want to serve. Why am I on the backside of the desert? Let me lead. Let me at them. You got a racehorse here. Let me go. And on the backside of the wilderness, that's not what the wilderness is for. In fact, what I find really ironic is after 40 years of being in the wilderness, Moses started realizing where the real power lied. And it wasn't in the education. It wasn't in his training. It wasn't in fight school. It wasn't in leadership school for being Pharaoh. What he learned, in fact, God said, I want you to go back. And what did he say? Well, I'm not eloquent enough. I can't even talk. And that was his biggest reason. Because when you've been on the wilderness a long time, let me tell you, it's hard for an empty bag to stand up straight. It's really hard, but that's when you're forced to rely on him. And I think he intentionally puts us in those situations so that we can do that, and especially in business. I mean, when you're going through a time, I remember, and Peter alluded to it, every day, my Google alerts were going crazy, on how many people blocked us. And I remember, the airlines and the media made a specific point of naming each airline each day. So it wasn't enough to just say Delta, Bandom, the next day is American Airlines, the next day United, and they just all piggyback. And then it's like, well, this university and that university and this school and that school. And Peter, I think after about 2 weeks or so, it started being churches, church campuses. I'm like, what business am I in? And it wasn't even ours, but it didn't matter. Didn't matter. So as a God business, as a God CEO, when you're going through the wilderness, I want to give you a few things that I think that will really help you, because there's 3 things that will cause your wilderness experience to extend itself, and what I want to do is cut it as short as possible so that you can break free from that. But here's the 3 enemies while you're in the wilderness that you need to be careful of. Number 1 is doubt. Doubt. And in business, I would sometimes say, I know this is possible, I just don't know if it's possible for me. You may have whatever company you have, there's other companies doing well and doing better. I remember in the recession, people were talking about, real estate's down. Well, I knew new real estate companies coming up that were just doing business differently, that were killing it. No matter what business, at what time you tell me is struggling, there's always another business in the same industry, under the exact same conditions, absolutely killing it. The difference is how you're responding in the wilderness. Doubt is the number 1 killer. The second is discouragement. Discouragement and depression. Let me tell you, that is a silent killer in the workplace today. If you knew how many of your employees are discouraged or depressed, it would shock you. And it may be you. It may be the leader, right? We need that input in us. We need that spiritual encouragement that is just coming up sometimes and putting their arm around you and just saying, hey, let's pray about this conference call. You've got this. God is in control, and he's on the throne, and he's going to make a difference in your heart and life and in this business. I remember 2 Kings 19, and Elijah had just defeated 750 prophets of Baal. He just had like the epic victory of all time. Right? He just had a killer result. And so it's like he just closed the mother of all deals. I mean, he just acquired the biggest deal he'd ever done in his life. And then what happens the very next day, after the mountaintop experience, we find him running and wanting to literally so discouraged, so depressed, he asked God to take his life. And I don't know how many of you have been at the point of suicide, but I'm telling you, it is a real problem with the discouragement and depression, and it doesn't matter if things are going great or if things are going wrong. That almost is irrelevant because we have so many different examples, and this one was scriptural, of someone who just came off of a great victory, and it still caused them to be that way. One of the guys who created one of the best-selling fighting games on Xbox, I received a call in 2015, the summer of 2015, and it was a Friday night. He was a 30-year-old billionaire from creating this game, and he said he was about to take his life, and a friend of his got him on the phone with me, and literally he was not out of the clear until about Sunday morning. And I'm telling you, this is a 30-year-old kid. He was seriously overweight, and so there were other things that were really bothering him, and it caused him to want to take his life. And so we started dealing with this discouragement and this depression from that perspective, from a faith perspective, and understanding what God has a plan for his life. But let me tell you, sometimes whenever you go down a deep, dark path, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how much success you have. Depression and discouragement can absolutely be a killer, a productivity killer, or worse. I'll share that in a moment. The third thing is distractions. Distractions. When you're in the wilderness, the problem is you want to get out of the wilderness. So what starts happening is this person comes along and gives you this business idea. This person over here comes along and gives you this business plan. This one says, well, you can do this. And if I asked all of you guys in here what you think my business plan should be, I'd get a different answer from every one of you of how you think I should run my business. Well, if I'm not grounded, if I'm not rooted, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to join the idea of the week club, and I'm going to do your idea, and your idea, and your idea, and your idea. Well, that's not what a God business does. In fact, it's the opposite, because God said that a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. When you're that loosey-goosey and you don't know what you believe and why you believe it, then you're going to make a lot of bad decisions as a business leader. You're going to make a lot of bad decisions. I remember, and by the way, you have to own the decision once you make that decision. Whenever I was running the hoverboard company, this really came up quite a bit because so many people thought we should do 1,000 different things. In fact, I remember being in the conference room for just days on end, about 4 days, over 13, 14 hours, no lunch, no break. I mean, everything was just brought in, did not leave. And it was because there were so many different ways that you could do it, and you're trying to decide the best one. I'm telling you, you can easily get distracted in business, and that's not just on the business plans. Maybe it's something personal. I mean, whenever I decided to go back to college and get my MBA, I had to give up golf. I was a senior executive at a Fortune 500 company at that time. I got there because once I got there, I was in their golf club. And how many of you guys golf? You try going and telling your foursome that you golf with every week or every other day. You try going in there and telling them you're going to do something else with your time. See how that goes for you. I nearly lost my job over it, and I kid you not. It was worse than than getting divorced or something. You're divorcing your colleagues in that sense. It was unbelievable. It was a very real thing. But it was a distraction for me if I was going to continue with what I knew God called me to do. So I had to make that decision. But sometimes it's sports. Sometimes it's a hobby. There are different times where what is good in one season is a distraction in another. It's up to you to be in communion with God to figure out what that is. I'll tell you, the be-all, end-all for me is Matthew 6:33. If you're ever in doubt, it's seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. The problem is we don't seek him first. We seek the deal first. We seek the sale first. We seek the hot new recruit first. We seek the new prospects. We seek the government contracts. We seek the business and the revenue and the operations and the marketing. We seek everything else in the world but him. And he says, seek me first. It's not what happens, it's how you handle it. I remember, and what we want to do in the God business, what I want you to do is learn how to handle things properly. Respond properly to the wilderness, just like Moses. And of course, Moses did his greatest work in his twilight years, but it was not because of all of the credentials behind his name. It was because he was yielded and he was humble, and he said, I can't even speak. But I do want to point out one thing. Isn't it interesting that Aaron didn't do a lot of talking for him? What you end up finding out is Moses went in and God gave him a holy boldness. And Moses, once he kind of got back in the game, he was just like, give me that. Let my people go. And I love that. But it was God speaking through him. And that's where your power is going to come from as well. 3 things to do in the wilderness. Because like I said, it's not what happens, it's how you handle it. The circumstance, you've heard it said, is only about 10% of what happens. 90% of your life is how you respond to that 10%. And let me give you an example. If I got pulled over on my way from Orlando today, then I had 2 different options. I had 2 different responses. The guy could come up to the window, hand me the ticket, and I say thank you, and I keep going, and I'm on time, and everything works, everything's fine, pay the money, end of story. Or officer comes up to the window, I could say, what'd you pull me over for? Well, sir, you were speeding, I need your license and registration. What do you need my license and registration for? That's none of your business. Sir, I need your license and registration. I said no. Sir, get out of the car. And then, no, I'm not getting out of the car. Well, next thing you know, there's backup. They're dragging me out of the car. They're shoving me up against the car. My hands are behind my back. I'm handcuffed, and I'm not sharing with you tonight. And then I could be sitting in the cell saying, if they hadn't pulled me over, then none of this would have happened. But how many of us We are saying right now, with whatever business decision is in front of us that we don't like, that we are delaying and procrastinating to make because we don't like any of the alternatives, or a personal decision or things like that, and we keep telling ourselves, if this hadn't happened, I wouldn't even be in this situation. I wouldn't even have to make that. And the truth of the matter is, it's not what happens, it's how you handle it. And so I'm going to give you 3 ways to handle the wilderness. Number 1, be still. Be still. The problem is you think you're going to fix it. Be still and let God fight your battles for you. Psalms talks about it. Exodus talks about it. He can't fight until you're out of the way. What helped me be still, and because I struggle with that, I was like, I'll be still, but like I'm going to still kind of do just a little bit over here. But I'm being still. Most of me is being still, but I'm going to send that little email and you go do this and this happened. And he goes, be still. And it was when I found that verse, and he said, be still. And I'll fight for you. And I remember thinking, that changes my whole world, because now it's not a matter of I'm just being still. He is fighting for me. And I know as long as my hands are in there, what I'm telling him is I can do a better job than you can. I can run this company better than you, God. I can manage this business better than you. I can manage this team better than you. I can develop more innovative products than you. And then I realized how arrogant, and just had to repent of what a horrible perspective. So be still and let him fight. The second thing, and by the way, Isaiah 60:22, when the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen. You don't have to be the one to make things happen. He will. Second thing is strategize. Embrace the struggle during those seasons of the wilderness. Embrace the struggle. One of the things I'll share with you on that is in Ecclesiastes. There's a verse that says, I'd rather go to the house of pain instead of the house of plenty. So instead of where the buffet is and there's a party going on and everything is great, Solomon's like, I'd rather go down to the house of pain, because we don't learn in the house of pleasure. We don't learn on the mountaintop. We don't learn when things are going great. What really transforms a person is how much pain they have gone through. If I asked you how much personal pain you've gone through, if someone has done you wrong, if someone has taken advantage of you, if someone has stolen from you or abused you or somehow taken advantage, if you've gone through financial pain or physical pain, what pain changes a person. And he said, embrace that pain, embrace the struggle, willingly choose to do the hard thing that is right, as opposed to the easy thing that feels better. The third thing you do in the wilderness is pray. And that's not just a superficial thing. I'm telling you, there's times that I pray and there's times that I've prayed. You know the difference? You know the difference? Let me tell you, there's times where I've needed to just pray fire down from heaven, because I need a supernatural working of God in my life and business. Peter shared his story at the beginning about that one night where he needed God in a big way. And let me tell you, you will in the wilderness be in times where he is all you have. And what do you find whenever he's all you have? You find he's all you need. Absolutely. So here's the thing. Whenever you're dealing with the wilderness, whenever you are praying, I shared earlier on generosity that God He will not give to you what He wants to give through you. But I would also say on here that God will not protect you from things that He wants to perfect you through. That's hard. That's hard. He will not protect you from some things that He wants to go through with you. Financial loss. You become a much more you become a better money manager. You learn how to trust people. You learn how to vet people. You learn how to use the 4 things that Charles was referencing. You learn how to have more wisdom. You learn how to assess people. You know, good judgment. When you read Proverbs, good judgment and discernment are some of the most critical skills that you can have. If I was hiring a CEO today, I don't care as much about all of his formal education and all that other stuff. What I care about is, what is his judgment like and what is his discernment like? Can he discern between the chaff and the wheat? Can he discern between not just right and wrong and good and bad, but better and best? Those are the decisions that we're faced with most. And so whether it's divorce, whether it's lawsuits, legal battles, like I said, everything that I went through with SEC, FDA, IRS, any of the other organizations, the bottom line is that God was right there with us. Just like just like the 3 Hebrew children that went through the fiery furnace. Isaiah 43:2, when thou passest through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers you will not drown. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. I'm telling you, there's times I thought I was going to be burned. There's times I thought I was going to drown. And he says very clearly, look, I'm going with you. I'm going to be there with you through it. 4 years ago, I went through my own wilderness journey. I shared a little bit about the divorce earlier. Very tough. I had focused from the time I was 19. My goal was to be the CEO of a $1 billion company. And I did the only thing I knew how to do, and that was work hard and get results. And I did realize early on the different the ways to work with people, and that I was going to adapt to their style, not expect everybody to adapt to mine, which is what most of the CEOs and executives demanded, because we could have with our position. And I realized that to get to where I wanted to go as fast as I wanted to get there, that was not going to work. And so I really went on a personal growth journey, but what ended up happening was I sacrificed everything, and I sacrificed anything I had to, and nobody ever kind of took me aside and said, hey, man, you're making some tough decisions. Just know, your decisions have consequences. I'm not telling you what to decide, but I'm telling you, here's what happens if you keep going that direction. I missed birthdays, I missed everything, and then things started to really unravel, and so that ended up, that house of cards came tumbling down, and I remember the pain and really getting to a place of how do I accomplish what God wants me to accomplish in business and love my family, have a family and love, and be the kind of husband and father that God wants me to be. I didn't know how to do that. How does that even look? Because I didn't have a lot of role models, and we don't have a lot of role models that are playing at that level that have strong Christian families. And of course, so I didn't know what God was doing through me with all of that pain, but I tell you one thing, after a good year and a half of going through that wilderness, I was so ready for God. He had just really done a work in me and transformed my life. He rearranged my priorities. And of course now I'm engaged to my beautiful bride, married on November 5th of this year, Chelsea. And so what I'm telling you is that we all go through the wilderness. We all go through those times of refinement, but the refinement doesn't come from pleasure. It comes from pain. It comes from fire. And you're going to go through it. You're going to go through it in your life and your business. But a God business and a God CEO is going to be still. They're going to strategize and they're going to pray. The second season that you'll go through is divine favor. And favor isn't fair, and favor causes jealousy. And if you haven't earned it the way that the world defines it, then they're going to look and they're going to start throwing stones, and they're going to try and pull you down. They will lie. You want to find out what people are capable of, run for a public office. You'll hear all kinds of things that don't even have a shred of truth. I always thought that it had to at least have a shred, the whole where there's smoke, there's fire things. No, not really. It doesn't even have to be smoke. They'll just say whatever they have to if they know that will turn people against you. And so, and I feel like, Joseph obviously had the power of God on his life and divine favor. And one of the most fascinating things to me is how whenever he just shared, thinking that he was doing God's will, he's just sharing, here's this dream that I had, and then people hated him for it. His brothers hated him for it. They put him in the pit. They sell him into slavery. But then God's favor is still with him. So many times, which I misunderstood this, whenever I've been down, I thought that God's favor and hand of blessing was not on me anymore. And that's not true at all. Joseph still had the favor of God just because he was in the pit. And part of the favor was being sold into slavery. How is that ever favor? How is you losing a deal? How is losing a contract? How is losing your best employee? How is that favor? It very well may be, as God is doing a mighty work in your life and business. So Joseph gets to Potiphar's house. Now, he had to work his way up from entry level to running the place. Well, guess what? Any good leader, what do? They put in systems. They put in processes. They delegate. I imagine Joseph was a very well-rounded leader, great manager, because he was always promoted everywhere he led. And so I just imagine when you go to a company or your business that you started, you've put in all these solutions, these processes, these systems. And imagine, though, that one day Mrs. Potiphar comes to you. Now, you've been working hard. You've put in all this sweat equity. You've risen to the top. Mrs. Potiphar comes along, says, lay with me. You say no. In fact, she starts to force herself on you, and you're like, I can't even pack up my box I can't even pack up my office. I just have to get out of here. I've got to leave the systems. I've got to leave the processes. And the thing is, there are some of you that are in you're in a season of divine favor right now, and there are things that you are holding on to that you should be running from. And if you're not careful, in fact, it's impossible for you to be careful. When you play with fire, you get burned, Proverbs says. But in Joseph's situation, he was wrongly accused. He was falsely accused. And all of you in business, you've had that happen, right? Somebody, maybe a customer left you a negative review, and you did everything in your power to fix it, and they still did that. They've wronged you. And I want you to think about the person in your life that has wronged you the most. I mean maliciously. They did you wrong. They hurt you. You have the name? You have a face? When you're in a season of divine favor and you are maliciously wronged, not only should you expect that, but I'm going to give you a couple things you can do to respond to that appropriately. Because what most of us do when we're wronged is what? We respond. We react, not respond. We immediately just throw up and back whatever. How many times on social media do you see somebody make a post, they get mad, you get mad, you respond to it, and then they say something mean back, and it goes back and forth. Or even in business, if somebody, you're the leader, somebody challenges you in the sales meeting, or they're insubordinate, and you want to put them in their place and show them who's boss, and correct the fool so that the wise will be aware, and all of this stuff, and it backfires on you completely. And the key. When you are being wronged, the key, and I'm going to share a few things with you, is you've got to get out of there, and you've got to do what Joseph did. The only reason why Joseph ever had a future past that was because he forgave. You don't find him in the prison cell still talking about Potiphar's wife. Man, I would not be here if it wasn't for Mrs. Potiphar. Cannot believe Mrs. Potiphar. Mrs. Potiphar's, evil, and she's the devil, and this. No, you don't find any of that. You find him focused on what God then had him to do, and then he rises up. And what I find interesting about favor there is when he says when he interprets the dreams, he says, hey, when you go back before the king, remember me. He was asking for a referral. When you get there, don't forget me. And we have to be bold in those seasons and ask for what God's placed on your heart to do. But I want you to think about who or what do you need to flee from today? Who do you need to walk away from? I'm going to give you a few ideas. 4 things that you need to flee. Number 1, you need to flee wrong influences. Friends, colleagues, family, whatever it is, flee wrong influences. Chelsea and I spent last evening in the home of a family that I counseled the young man, 20-year-old guy, twice. And she met him at a boat show that we were at. Their family owns a boat dealership. And Friday night, he went to a party, and I got the text on Saturday morning that Gary passed away at a party. And at that time, all we knew is that the police were involved, and he was at the hospital and obviously didn't make it. We spent last night with his parents and his grandparents, and they were just pouring out their hearts to us about how much they tried to help him, how much they what a good kid he was, and all of these things. But they said about 2 weeks ago there was a new bad influence in the friend group, and he thought it was a really cool house, a really cool place to hang out. 2 weeks later, he's dead. Flee wrong influences. Number 2, flee vices of the flesh. Look, you know what gets us business people in trouble more than making the wrong business decision? It's our bad. It's our vices of the flesh. Maybe it's alcohol, or it's sex, or it's pornography, or it's whatever it is. That's a vice that ends up consuming us, and it ends up taking over, and then it affects our judgment, and it affects our discernment, and it's a rampant problem. I was speaking to a group of there was 1,000 Christian business owners, all men. And I remember them saying, statistically, 7 out of 10 of you are addicted to pornography. All of a sudden, you start looking around. They were 8-person tables, so you're like, oh well, 7 of us here. And then they said 4 of you at your table, 4 of you looked at it. Well, this was a 6 a.m. leadership breakfast. They said 4 of you looked at it before you came into this room this morning. 40% of pastors struggle with it. I'm telling you, flee vices of the flesh. Drugs, prescription or illegal, doesn't matter. Alcohol's ruined more families, marriages, careers. I lost all 4 of my grandparents to alcohol. It doesn't matter, religious, non-religious. It doesn't matter what you feel about some of those things. I'm just saying that it causes a lot of problems. You try having it at your Christmas party and see what happens. See if you ever have any problems come from that, Everybody doesn't drink responsibly, no matter how many times you tell them to drink responsibly. Like I said, I lost all 4 grandparents. My grandmother on my mom's side, I met her one time, and we tracked her down at a bar, and I was in the 4th grade, and my mom, it was a shotgun bar in Louisville, Kentucky, just one long bar. She was middle of the day, she was the only one in there. And she's at the bar drinking. My mom told me to stand at the door. The door was open. And all I heard was my mom say, well, don't you at least want to come out and meet your grandson? And she said, why would I want to do something like that for? My mom on my dad's side committed suicide under the influence. I'm telling you, I don't know what the vices are, but I can tell you the high-profile individuals that I've worked with, I can tell you what they struggle with, and it's these kind of vices. The reason any person that struggles that you end up seeing on TV, you can usually, when you get behind the curtain, there's an underlying vice that causes these things to bubble up and surface. I'm telling you, you want to deal with them and you want to flee them. The 3rd thing that you want to flee is distractions. People, place, things. The 4th thing is you want to flee thoughts of revenge, bitterness, and doubt. That person that wrongs you, that did you wrong? What if Joseph just stewed about his brothers? What if he just plotted against his brothers? One of these days I'm going to get out, and when I do, oh, you better run. You better hope I don't find you. You better hope I never get up. You better hope I never get out, because I'm coming after you. That's the easy thing to do. When I lost everything, that guy, the FBI, whenever I asked him, I said, well, he's got my money. What can I do? And they said, you'll never see it again. I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And they said, well, you can sue him. You'll win. You'll get a judgment. And then that'll take a couple of years, 2 or 3 years because of all of the court stuff. And then what you can do is you'll get a judgment. And then with the judgment, you can try and collect on it, but you won't be able to collect on it because he's not going to ever see the light of day. So you're going to spend the next 3, 4, 5 years on trying to get a few $1 million. So I don't really know what to tell you. And I made the decision shortly after that if I just forgave, then I would be free to go make that or more in the same or less amount of time. And regardless, that did not happen as fast. But what I can tell you is that I was able to sleep at night. I had peace that passes all understanding. I had joy in my heart and life. And I'm able to stand here today and tell you what the path of not seeking revenge looks like. And I can tell you, if I had sought revenge, I probably would not be up here tonight because I'd probably be in a cell next to him. So those are the different decisions that you need to make. Who do you need to forgive, personally or in business? And then Joseph said, Isaiah 50:20, you did evil unto me, but God meant it for good. The last thing I want to share with you, the last season, is wise counsel. Look, you need to have wise counsel around you in your life and business. The difference, there's a way that seemeth right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. One of the things that I read on a proverb on Sunday evening was that there's a way that seemeth right, but it's in the multitude of counselors, of course, that there is safety. And so one of the things that you have to do, how do you know if you're doing on the right path? Because it says there's a way that seemeth right. Well, that means I've got good intentions. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm just really, really wrong. How many of you have ever heard an employee come to you and they're coming from with the right motive, the right intent? It's just completely wrong. All right? It's like, please don't do that. I know you mean well, but that's really going to mess things up. Don't do that. That's exactly what you and I do as leaders, as entrepreneurs and business people. And the only way to know what is right, according to the Proverbs, is the wise counsel. So are you getting other people, godly counsel, validating the decisions that you're making in your life? 3 landmines that you need the wisdom of Solomon to navigate. Number 1, relationships. Relationships and associations. You are or soon will be who your friends are. I was an advisor on a high-profile murder trial, murder for hire trial, as a matter of fact. And that man, even though he wasn't the one that did it, it was a friend. The friend got off with just a few years, and he was the one that actually committed the act, and he was on death row. And the only reason why he ever did it was because he had a friend that said, well, why don't you just have somebody do it? Why don't you just take her out? Why don't you do whatever? It was a friend. 2 Samuel, you know the story of Amnon, David's son, King David's son. And in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 3, it says something very profound. See, Amnon had a half-sister named Tamar, and he had the hots for her. I mean, she was just stunning. And Amnon wanted her bad. And so he had never acted on anything, but he had it up here. And one day he told one of his friends, one of his buddies, bro talk. He's telling one of his buddies, he's like, man, and maybe even his friend brought it up. But he's like, man, Tamar is just smoking hot. I mean, this is just, it's killing me. And his friend says, why don't you? You're the king's son. You can have anything you want. Why don't you act like you're sick? You know Dad's going to come and be like, hey, man, what do you need to get feeling better? And say, just maybe if she can make me some cookies, some lemonade, whatever, bring it to me, I'll get feeling better. And in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 3, it says, but Amnon had a friend. But Amnon had a friend. But he had a friend. But he had a friend named Jonadab. And Jonadab gives him this plan. And then guess what Amnon did? Amnon did something that he never would have done if it wasn't for the wrong friend in his life. He acted like he was sick. King David said, what do you need, son? He said, I need Tamar to make me something and bring it to me. She does. He says, lie with me. She says, no, you don't want to do this. And he forced himself. He raped her. And then the Bible says that he hated her. His hate for her was greater than his love for her ever was. Because of a friend, because of the wrong friend. So what counsel, what strategies are you implementing in your business right now that did not come from godly counsel, and you're wondering why you keep hitting roadblocks and you're stumbling, or in your life? You want to get that, you want to get that right and have the right people around you. Every pain and every loss I've ever experienced, financially, relationally, legally, in any possible scenario, was because of a wrong friend or influence or association. Because of a wrong influence or association. The second thing the second landmine that I want you to be wary of, that you need counsel through, is addictions. Addictions. And we've talked about several of those. I shared the story about our dear friend that passed away over the weekend. Certainly wanted the help. Certainly did not want to be besieged by it. He struggled. And then the third landmine is your thought life. In business, it's even in high-profile sports, it's all your results, your success is all about how you manage here. Imagine, I remember working with a couple of the NBA players, and if one of them told little Susie she could not go stay the night at her friend's house, and guess what? He gets a text message 30 minutes before game time and says, basically, forget you, Dad. I'm paraphrasing. Forget you, Dad. I'm at the friend's house that you told me not to go. Well, what should have been a 20-point game turned out to be a 2-point game. Did he all of a sudden lose his skill as he's not as good of a player? Had nothing to do with skill. Had everything to do with his thoughts. Had everything to do with his mind. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The secret to success and the secret to failure, as Earl Nightingale said, is the same. You are or soon will be what you think about most of the time. People think they can hide it. They think they can think one thing and then act all positive and things like that, and they think they've got people fooled. But let me tell you, your life is like a walking billboard of your thoughts. You want to guard what's in here. I want to close with this story. I love horses. Peter was mentioning, and when I was 15, I worked on a horse ranch. 4 of us cowboys tended 110 head of horses on a 1,500-acre ranch. When I got home after that, I wanted to show my dad how I could ride and run a horse like crazy, you know. And I was really proud of that. And of course, you feel a 1,700-pound animal, you know, hoofing it across a field. I mean, you feel like a man. And I, you know, so 15-year-old, and I wanted some father-son time. And so I said, Dad, I know you do not like horses. He was on one once as a kid, you know, and had a bad experience, so they never want to get on them again. I said, Dad, would you please, you know, let's go out into the woods. There's a pond on the other side of the mountain, and, you know, we'll be able to do this. And a friend of ours had 2 horses, Major and Lily. And Major was just a crazy horse. He was psycho. He would do crazy stuff. But Lily, on the other hand, was a trail horse. Lily, I don't care how much you spurred her on, and she had one speed, and it was reverse. And so she would never do anything but this, ever. And so I said, Dad, don't even worry. You're going to get to ride Lily. Like, you might not even make it to the pond to eat lunch. So he agreed to go. It took 4 hours. We make it back down. There was a pond. It was a picturesque thing, too. Tied up the horses, have lunch. We start to go back. We get to the clearing, to an open field, and I said, hey, Dad, wait right here. I'm going to run Major across the field. And I want you to see how, just like in the movies, John Wayne, Roy Rogers, I'm going to show you how I can run a horse. So and Major can fly. I mean, he's a big boy. So I took off on Major. I was like, and I'm hauling across. Cowboy hat goes flying off. I'm hauling across this field. And I get to the other side of the field, turn around to see the proud look on my dad's face. And instead, what I saw was Lily, being the good trail horse that she is, had spooked, took off in the opposite direction, running as fast as she could. The saddle had shifted. My dad was hanging on by one leg in the stirrup, being dragged on the ground in a foot of marsh. I did not know if his head was being crushed with each step or if he was drowning. I did not know. I turned around, whipped Major around. I go hauling after my dad and across the field, caught up to Lily, reached out and grabbed her bridle, brought him to a stop, got off. And obviously, first thing, catch me to get my dad to see if he was alive or what the damage was. And miraculously, she was running fast enough that his head wasn't hitting the ground, and it was away from the hooves. And he had just gotten, you know, under the water a few times. The only bones that were broken that day were mine from stopping Lily. We got to the edge of the clearing, and we were just sitting down, and I'm like, I almost lost my dad. The horses were freaked out. We're all upset. And I'm like, great. The one time I get my dad on a horse, and this is what happens. And we sat there for a while, and about 30 minutes later, my dad said, well, you ready to get back? And I said, yeah. And he told me, and I got up and I started leading Major away. And he said, aren't we going to get on? And I said, well, I didn't think you'd want to. He said, well, I know that if you get knocked off, you're supposed to get back on, and it's bad for the horse, and he trains them the wrong way, and I've heard you talk about it. He said, I don't mind, I'll do it. And you know, my dad never sat down and told me, son, when life knocks you down, you get back on the horse, and you triumphantly move on. He never told me any of those things. It was caught more than taught. And I saw my dad get back up on that horse, and we rode the rest of the way to the barn. Let me tell you, your employees, your staff, your family, your friends, your children, they're watching. And this whole business about the God business and making your private faith publicly relevant, it's caught more than taught. Thank you for allowing me to share tonight.